Victoria Kane thought she had finally escaped the shadows of betrayal, but when the truth clawed its way back, she realized the greatest danger wasn't the enemy she unmasked. It was the one still waiting in the dark, closer than she ever imagined. The table was already set when Victoria Kane arrived at her parents' sprawling estate. The house looked perfect from the outside, lights glowing warmly against the night, windows polished to reflect the grandeur within. It was her father's stage, the theater in which he performed his well-practiced role of patriarch, the man of power and dignity admired by everyone who walked through his doors. The long dining table stretched across the main hall, draped in a flawless white cloth, crystal glasses sparkling like diamonds under the chandelier, silver cutlery lined with military precision. It was meant to impress, not to welcome. Every gathering her parents hosted was less about love and more about appearances, an endless performance where every smile was rehearsed and every toast choreographed. Victoria slipped inside quietly, instinctively lowering her gaze as she moved toward the kitchen to help her mother. She had learned long ago that being invisible was easier than being noticed. Her mother was arranging the platters, her hands efficient and graceful but her eyes cold. Roast beef glistened under the lights, garlic potatoes sent up waves of sharp aroma, salads sat untouched in bowls that would only serve as decoration. Victoria placed a tray of bread rolls on the table when her mother leaned in close, her lips curving into a smile that looked more like a mask. "Smile, Victoria," her mother whispered, her voice a warning wrapped in sugar. "Do not embarrass us tonight." Her mother's smile widened as she straightened, aimed not at Victoria, but at the hovering relatives who glanced their way. It was the kind of smile that fooled neighbors, the kind that promised perfection in a family that was anything but. Victoria forced her lips upward, though the effort tasted bitter. Her chest already felt tight, a premonition of the humiliation she knew was coming. The guests filed in with soft laughter, their voices bouncing off the marble floors. Relatives from distant cities whom they barely spoke to throughout the year had flown in just to attend. That was her father's doing. He thrived on these nights, collecting admiration like trophies. Dinner began as it always did, with her father commanding the table as if it were his private stage. He stood at the head, glass of wine raised, pausing for dramatic effect as he launched into stories where he was always the hero. He gestured with wide, theatrical sweeps, timing his jokes perfectly to draw polite laughter from every corner of the room. Phones appeared, cameras clicked, and an aunt angled her device to capture a video of him mid-speech, as if he were a celebrity worthy of recording. Victoria sat quietly, trying to disappear into the background as she chewed her food. Every time she opened her mouth to answer a polite question from an uncle or a cousin, her father cut her off, filling the silence with another anecdote about his business victories or his generosity. She became a prop in his show, silent and compliant. About halfway through the meal, her uncle chuckled and remarked on how quiet she was. Her father turned, his smile sharp, his eyes glinting with cruel amusement. "She has always been better seen than heard," he said, and the table erupted in polite chuckles. But he was not finished. He leaned closer, his voice raised just enough to command the attention of every guest. "You know what? Let's make her useful." Victoria froze, fork suspended in midair. The tone in his voice was dangerous, the kind that made her stomach drop. Before she could react, his hand gripped the back of her head and shoved with a sudden, violent force. Her face crashed into her plate. Mashed potatoes smeared across her skin, gravy scalded her cheek, bits of roast clung to her hair. The sting of humiliation burned hotter than the heat of the food. Gasps erupted around the table, but so did laughter. Some cousins clapped their hands over their mouths, trying to stifle their giggles, while others recorded the scene with phones they could not lower quickly enough. Victoria lifted her head slowly, trembling, food sliding down her cheek. Her father sat back, beaming as if he had just delivered the punchline of the evening. "There," he announced, pointing at her. "Now she matches the table." The laughter grew louder, mixed with awkward glances from those too cowardly to intervene. Her mother raised her wine glass delicately, sipping as though nothing unusual had happened. Victoria's sister Madison, her father's golden child, smirked across the table, her eyes alight with satisfaction. Victoria's body screamed at her to cry, but she forced her tears back. She would not give him that. Crying would have been his triumph. Instead, She dabbed at her face with a napkin, her hands shaking so violently she could hardly hold it. Her father leaned toward her uncle again, his voice dripping with false charm. "She is sensitive, cannot take a joke," he said, drawing another round of laughter. The rest of the dinner blurred into a haze of humiliation. Each bite she swallowed tasted like ashes. Whenever someone raised their phone, she felt the sting of shame, knowing that her disgrace was now saved in pixels, ready to be shared and replayed. The lights dimmed, and a hush swept through the hall. Conversation stilled, glasses were set down, and every eye turned toward the projector screen. The title slide appeared in elegant white letters across a black background, A Night to Remember. Victoria sat near the back, her chair angled so she could watch both the screen and her family's faces. Her father leaned forward in his seat at the head table, his expression already beaming with pride. Madison positioned herself for a flattering photo, tilting her chin just so. Her mother folded her hands neatly on the table, her wine glass within reach, every movement calculated to reflect grace. The slideshow began with harmless images, stock photos of champagne glasses clinking, smiling relatives frozen in posed portraits. The crowd murmured with recognition, pointing at themselves and chuckling quietly. Her father chuckled along, nodding as if he had orchestrated every perfect moment. Then the tone shifted. The first of Victoria's clips appeared. Her father stood tall at the head of the dinner table, his voice booming across the room. Family is about respect. It is about loyalty. We must never forget that what we share is stronger than anything else. His words rang with authority, smooth and polished, the kind of performance he had perfected over the years. Heads nodded in the footage, the guests' smiles polite and approving. But then, as his words echoed, the image shifted. The video cut seamlessly to the moment of violence, slowed almost to a crawl. His hand pressed hard against the back of Victoria's head, slamming her into the plate. Mashed potatoes exploded across the frame. Gasps echoed in the banquet hall as the laughter from the original recording filled the speakers. "Make yourself useful as decoration," his voice sneered from the speakers, his grin frozen in cruel triumph. The room's silence was suffocating. A few guests shifted uncomfortably, their faces pale in the glow of the screen. The video replayed the scene from another angle, her mother calmly sipping wine while Victoria wiped food from her face. Then another. Dylan's footage, close and clear, showing every smirk, every glimmer of satisfaction in her father's eyes. Between the clips, white text appeared stark against black, a father's joke, a family's laughter, a daughter's humiliation. Someone whispered from the audience, "This is not funny." Another muttered, "My God." Her father shifted in his chair, his face tightening, but he did not speak. He sat frozen, as though silence could undo what the audience had seen. The montage continued. It did not stop at the dinner. Victoria had threaded in years of cruelty, moments that had been dismissed as harmless jokes at her expense. A clip of him shoving her into a pool at a wedding while her makeup smeared down her cheeks. A cousin's shaky video of her mother telling someone, "We do not expect much from Victoria. She is not like Madison." A neighbor's candid recording of her father mocking her career choices in front of their guests, drawing laughter at her expense. Interspersed with these humiliations were the images her parents adored. Polished holiday photos, glittering Christmas cards, posed family portraits where everyone smiled as though nothing was wrong. The contrast was unbearable. The crowd shifted from uneasy murmurs to whispers of outrage. A woman in the third row shook her head slowly, her lips pressed in a thin line. A business associate of her father leaned over to his wife and whispered something that made her frown deeply. Madison had stopped looking at the screen entirely. Her eyes locked on Victoria instead, wide with disbelief, her mouth twisted in a mixture of anger and fear. Victoria sat still, her face composed, but her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. The final clip arrived. The bathroom recording. The image of Victoria staring into the mirror, food still tangled in her hair, mascara smudged, her expression calm and unflinching. She looked straight into the lens and spoke with a voice that carried through the silent room. "This is what respect looks like in our family." The screen faded to black. The words appeared, "A night to remember for all the right reasons." And then the lights came on. No applause followed. No polite laughter. Just silence, thick and heavy, pressing down on every person in the hall. Her father's face was pale, his jaw clenched so hard the muscle twitched visibly. His hands gripped the arms of his chair as if anchoring himself in place. Her mother reached for her wine glass, but her fingers trembled, the liquid inside quivering with her fear. Around them, the relatives looked away, whispering among themselves. Aunt Sherry leaned toward her husband and said, "I had no idea," loud enough for those nearby to hear. At the far table, Mr. Harlan, one of her father's longtime business contacts, pushed back his chair with a scrape. He rose slowly, his face stony. "I think we have seen enough. Good evening." Without another word, he turned and walked out, his wife following. 3 other couples rose and left with him. The whispering swelled, a tide of judgment that could not be stopped. Her father finally stood, his booming voice strained as he tried to retake control. "This is taken out of context. It was a joke, nothing more. You all know me, you know what kind of man I am." But no one responded. No one nodded. The silence was louder than his words. Victoria rose from her chair, her movements deliberate, unhurried. She picked up her bag and walked toward the exit, every step steady. Madison hissed at her as she passed, her voice sharp and venomous. "You think this makes you better? You think this makes you anything?" Victoria did not answer. She did not need to. At the doorway, she paused and turned back once. Her father was still standing at the head of the table, shouting over the noise, insisting that everyone had misunderstood, that the videos were manipulated, that it had all been lighthearted. But no one was listening. The image of him forcing her head into her plate had burned itself into their minds, indelible, undeniable. She stepped out into the cool night air. The doors closed behind her, shutting out the noise, shutting out the performance. For the first time in years, she breathed deeply, her lungs filling with air untainted by fear. She did not need the files anymore. She did not need proof. The truth had already been delivered to the only audience that mattered. At home, she deleted the videos from her phone. Her revenge was complete, but the story was far from over. Because humiliation was only the first crack in her father's empire, and she could feel in her bones that the real collapse had only just begun. By the time the meal ended, her father was already posing with Madison for photographs, his arm draped proudly around his perfect daughter. Madison leaned into him, her smile radiant as she glanced at Victoria, smirk deepening like a blade twisting in a wound. Victoria excused herself quietly and escaped into the bathroom. She locked the door, gripping the sink as her reflection stared back. Gravy streaked through her hair, mascara smeared across her cheeks, her eyes glassy but dry. Her chest tightened not with grief but with something darker. Anger. And then the realization struck her like a spark igniting dry timber. Every single one of those relatives had a phone. Phones that had captured the moment in unforgiving clarity. Her father, who lived for his reputation, who built his empire of admiration on polished appearances, had no idea that his cruelty had been recorded from multiple angles. Victoria leaned closer to the mirror, a smile creeping across her lips for the first time that night. It was not joy that curved her mouth, but resolve. She knew exactly how to turn his greatest weapon against him. When she returned to the dining hall, she deliberately melted into the background. No one noticed the quiet one in the corner, not when the spotlight remained fixed on her father and Madison. They were too busy delivering speeches about family unity, too caught up in the charade to notice Victoria's watchful eyes tracking every hand that held a phone. During dessert, she slipped into a casual conversation with her younger cousin Dylan. He was only 14, addicted to his phone and eager to be treated like an adult. "Hey," she said lightly, keeping her tone warm. "Do me a favor. Can you send me that video from earlier? You know, for memories." Dylan grinned, his eyes bright. "The mashed potato thing? That was hilarious." Victoria clenched her jaw but forced a laugh. "Yeah, that one. Send it before you forget." By the time the cake was cut, the video arrived in her messages. She opened it discreetly, her pulse quickening as she saw the clear footage. Her father's voice rang sharp and unmistakable, his hand shoving her head into the plate, the chorus of laughter echoing around him. It was not the only one. Over the next 2 days, she collected more clips. Aunt Sherry forwarded a shaky vertical video where the gasp of shock was audible. Cousin Ashley provided a crystal-clear recording that showed every detail: the smirk on her father's face, the wine glass in her mother's hand, the exact moment her humiliation was sealed. Dylan's close-up captured every cruel word. 3 angles, 3 perfect nails for his coffin. But raw footage would not be enough. Her father was a master manipulator, a man who could twist cruelty into comedy, turning humiliation into entertainment. If she simply leaked the videos, he might convince others it was a harmless joke. No, she needed something sharper, something undeniable. Victoria sat in her room for hours, editing the clips. She did not cut anything out. She wove them together. She added context, inserted fragments of his speeches about family values, stitched in smiling holiday photos, and crafted a montage that stripped away his mask. The shove played in slow motion, laughter echoing like cruel applause, her face rising from the plate frozen in a haunting frame. She inserted text in bold letters: a father's joke, a family's laughter, a daughter's humiliation. For the final blow, she added her own recording from that night. Standing in the bathroom mirror, streaks of food still in her hair, she looked into the lens with calm intensity. "This is what respect looks like in our family," she said. Fade to black. The file sat on her computer, glowing like a secret weapon. She did not upload it to the internet. That was not the revenge she wanted. She wanted her father to watch his empire collapse around him in real time, surrounded by the very people whose admiration he craved. The opportunity came sooner than she expected. A week later, her parents announced another gathering, a slideshow event for relatives and close friends. They planned to showcase a montage of family memories from the dinner night, projected on a rented screen in the banquet hall. It was meant to cement the image of unity and joy. It was perfect. Victoria had already scouted the projector during setup the previous week. She knew exactly where the USB port was, exactly how long it would take to swap files. She prepared her drive carefully, naming the file innocuously. All she had to do was slip it in at the right moment. When the night arrived, the hall buzzed with chatter and clinking glasses. Expensive appetizers floated on silver trays, waiters moving gracefully among the guests. Her father boomed with laughter, shaking hands, clapping friends on the back. Madison fluttered about in a new designer dress, snapping selfies with anyone who would pose. Victoria waited, her heart pounding. She did not need to rush. Timing was everything. When the crowd shifted toward the tables, she moved swiftly to the projector, her hands steady despite the storm raging inside her chest. In less than 10 seconds, her drive was inserted, her file queued, the original slideshow replaced. She walked away, pulse drumming in her ears, as if the air itself vibrated with what was about to unfold. The morning after the masquerade felt unreal to Victoria Kane. She woke in her apartment with sunlight streaming through the half-drawn blinds, casting golden slashes across her face. For a fleeting moment, she almost convinced herself it had all been a fever dream: the glittering ballroom, the masked stranger with eyes that seemed to hold both promise and threat, the whispered warning that still burned in her ears. But the bruised ache in her chest from running, the faint smudge of gold glitter on her wrist from the mask ribbon, and the restless heaviness in her body told her it had been all too real. Victoria moved to the mirror in her bedroom and studied her reflection. Her dark hair was tangled from restless tossing, her eyes shadowed from lack of sleep, yet there was something else there now, a look she had not seen before. It was determined, fierce and unyielding. She had spent too many years letting her father's empire, her mother's absence, and her brother's shadow dictate her life. Now, whatever this conspiracy was, she would meet it head-on. She whispered to herself in the glass, almost a vow. No more running. No more being silent. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. An unknown number flashed. She hesitated, then answered. Silence for 3 beats, then a low male voice said, "You need to stop asking questions about the files. If you keep going, you will end up like your mother." The line cut off before she could respond. Victoria's hand trembled. She sank onto the bed, her breath catching. Her mother. Gone years ago under circumstances her father had always called an accident, a car crash on a lonely mountain road. But something deep in Victoria's soul had never believed it. Now the threat linked everything together. Her research, The mysterious files she had stumbled across at her father's company, the masked man who had seemed both an ally and a stranger, and the lingering shadow of her mother's death. Later that day, Victoria met Adrian at a quiet cafe near the river. He looked sharp, almost too sharp, in a tailored suit that seemed to swallow the casual atmosphere. His smile was tight when he saw her. She wasted no time. "Someone called me this morning. They knew I've been digging into the files, and they mentioned my mother." Adrian's brow furrowed, and he leaned closer. "Did they say anything else?" he asked. "Only that I would end up like her if I continued." He sighed, his jaw tightening. "Victoria, I was afraid of this. Once you start pulling threads in this family, dangerous things unravel." She studied him carefully, trying to read between the lines. Adrian was her father's legal advisor, a man she had grown up seeing at board meetings, holiday dinners, and company galas. He had always been the picture of composure. Yet now, there was tension coiled beneath his calm surface. "Adrian, do you know what happened to my mother?" she asked quietly but firmly, watching his every twitch. For a moment, his lips parted, and a flicker of pain crossed his features. Then he masked it with a sip of his coffee. "All I know is that she was asking questions, too. She wanted to expose something, and then she was gone." Victoria's heart thudded. "So my instincts were right," she said, voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fire. Adrian reached out, his hand briefly touching hers across the table. "If you keep going down this path, Victoria, you'll need allies you can trust. And there are not many left." His touch lingered longer than necessary, and her breath caught. The closeness, the intensity in his eyes, made her pulse quicken in ways she didn't expect. She pulled back gently, unsettled. She wasn't sure if Adrian was a protector, a betrayer, or something far more complicated. But she couldn't ignore the way her body reacted around him. That evening, she returned to her apartment only to find her front door slightly ajar. Panic surged through her veins. She pushed it open carefully, her senses on edge. Inside, nothing seemed stolen, but everything was slightly moved. A picture frame angled differently, a drawer left cracked open, her laptop powered off though she had left it running. Someone had been here. On her kitchen counter sat a single white envelope with her name scrawled across it. She opened it with shaking fingers. Inside was a photograph. Her mother, smiling, standing beside a man Victoria had never seen before. On the back, in rough handwriting, he was the one she trusted. "Don't make the same mistake." Victoria's mind spun. Who was the man, and who left the envelope a warning, a clue, or a trap? The suspense clawed at her ribs until she could hardly breathe. She called Adrian, but his number went straight to voicemail. Alone, she clutched the photograph to her chest, torn between tears and rage. 2 days later, Victoria attended a board meeting at Kane International, her father's empire built on shipping, real estate, and political influence. The conference room gleamed with glass walls and mahogany tables. Her father, Richard Kane, presided with his usual iron-fisted authority. Her brother, Daniel, sat at his side, smug in his carefully groomed image as heir apparent. Victoria slid into a seat across from them, the photo burning like a secret in her purse. Richard's eyes swept over her with cool disdain. "I hear you've been busy, Victoria. Stirring ghosts." She met his gaze, her voice calm though her stomach churned. "I just want the truth. About my mother. About everything." The room chilled. Daniel chuckled under his breath. "Always the sentimental one," he sneered. "Father already told you. It was an accident. Let the past stay buried." Richard raised a hand, silencing him. His voice was low and sharp. "If you value your safety, Victoria, stop this now. Some truths do not set you free. They destroy you." The meeting continued with financial reports, but Victoria barely heard. Her father's warning confirmed what she already knew. There was a truth so dangerous that even he feared it being unearthed. After the meeting, as she walked down the corridor, a hand grabbed her arm and pulled her into a side room. It was Adrian, his face tight with urgency. "Victoria, listen. You're in more danger than you realize. I can't explain everything yet, but tonight, meet me at the pier. Slip away quietly. Don't tell anyone." He pressed a small flash drive into her palm. "It holds part of what your mother was trying to expose. Only part. Keep it hidden until we talk." Before she could respond, He released her and disappeared back into the stream of employees. That night, Victoria drove to the pier, the city lights casting fractured reflections across the dark water. The air smelled of salt and iron. She clutched the flash drive in her hand, her nerves rattling. Footsteps echoed behind her. She turned and saw Adrian walking toward her. His features were tense, his eyes scanning the shadows. "Did you look at it yet?" he asked. "Not yet," she whispered. "Good. Keep it that way until you're safe." Suddenly, a sharp crack split the air. Gunfire. Victoria's scream caught in her throat as Adrian shoved her behind a stack of crates. Bullets splintered wood, sending shards flying. He pressed close, shielding her. "Stay down," he hissed. She felt the heat of his body, the raw edge of danger, and in the middle of chaos, her heart pounded not just with fear but with something far more complicated. Two masked men emerged from the shadows, guns raised. Adrian pulled a weapon from his coat and returned fire, the thunder of shots ringing over the water. Victoria crouched, her hands shaking, watching the man she wasn't sure she could trust risk his life to protect her. One of the attackers fell, the other fled into the night. Silence followed, heavy and broken only by the slap of waves against the pier. Adrian's chest heaved. He turned to her, his face pale. "They're going to hunt you now, Victoria. You need to choose. Stay in your father's gilded cage and be safe but blind, or step into the fire with me and risk everything for the truth." She stared at him, torn, her pulse racing. In that moment, the photograph in her purse, the flash drive in her palm, and the memory of her mother's eyes all seemed to whisper the same answer. She chose fire. The silence in the archive chamber pressed down like a suffocating weight as Victoria stared at the faint ink signature scrawled across the yellowed paper. The name was one she had seen before, not in dusty historical texts, but in her own life, whispered in fragments of memory from her childhood. Her hands trembled as she traced the letters. Marcus Kane, her father, the father she had been told had vanished during an expedition accident in Peru 2 decades earlier. Her chest constricted, heart racing as if trying to tear its way free. Why was his name here, bound to a coded document linked to Blackthorn Industries and the corporate conspiracy she had only begun to untangle? Could it be that he had not died, that he had been part of this labyrinth all along? Footsteps echoed at the far end of the corridor. Victoria stuffed the paper back into the folder, closed it, and pressed it tightly to her chest. She slipped into the shadows between 2 towering cabinets, just as the door creaked open. A figure entered, tall and deliberate, carrying a lantern whose glow sliced through the dark. "Dr. Kane," the voice called softly, too controlled, too rehearsed. It was Adrian Blackthorn. His tone was calm, but there was an edge of possession in the way he said her name, as though she were already a piece of his empire, not an adversary. Victoria pressed her back against the cabinet, forcing herself to remain silent. The lantern light swept closer, its glow revealing dust motes dancing in the air. Adrian paused, as though he could sense her presence even before he saw her. "You cannot hide the truth forever," he murmured, voice almost tender. "The question is not whether you'll face it, Victoria, but whether you'll survive it when it comes." Her breath hitched. She waited until he turned toward the far shelf, then darted past him, moving quickly down the corridor. His lantern swung wildly as he spun toward the sound of her steps. "Victoria!" His voice thundered, echoing off the stone walls. She sprinted through the passage, heart hammering, and burst into the open night air of the courtyard. The rain had begun again, cold sheets stinging her skin as she ran. She heard the heavy doors behind her slam open, Adrian's boots pounding after her. She dashed toward the gate, but it was locked. Her hands fumbled at the iron bars, slick with rain. "Running will not save you." Adrian's voice came closer, his shadow stretching in the lantern light. "You already belong to this." Victoria spun, gripping the folder tighter. "I belong to no one," she snapped, her voice cracking with both fear and defiance. Adrian stepped closer, rain dripping down his face, eyes glinting like dark obsidian. "Then why?" he asked, calm yet dangerous. "Does your name appear in the ledger alongside your father's?" Her stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" He tilted his head, lips curling faintly. "You think I came here to hunt you?" "No. I came to free you from lies you don't even know you've been living." Before she could respond, headlights flashed at the end of the courtyard. A car engine roared, and Noah's voice cut through the storm. "Victoria, get in!" She bolted toward the car. Adrian lunged forward, seizing her wrist. His grip was iron, pulling her toward him. For a split second their eyes locked, and she saw not only menace, but something else, an echo of truth, of recognition. "Don't trust him," Adrian hissed, his face inches from hers. "You have no idea who he really is." With a sharp twist, she wrenched free and dove into the passenger seat of Noah's car. Tires screeched as they sped away, leaving Adrian standing in the rain, the lantern's glow shrinking in the distance. Victoria clutched the folder, drenched and shaking. Noah glanced at her, jaw tight. "What did you find?" She hesitated, staring at the dripping ink of her father's name. "Something that changes everything." Noah's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Then tell me." She shook her head slowly. "Not yet. I need to understand it first. I need to know what this means." The city lights blurred past as the storm raged outside. Victoria's mind spiraled, torn between fear and a strange longing, haunted by Adrian's words, by the ghost of her father, by the questions clawing at her very identity. As dawn began to break, she sat in the dim glow of the motel room, the folder spread before her. Noah had gone to get coffee, leaving her alone with the truth she wasn't sure she wanted. Page after page revealed connections between her father and Blackthorn Industries, secret projects, expeditions, coded references to something called the Seraphim Protocol. And every thread circled back to her. A knock at the door startled her. She froze, then heard Noah's voice. "It's me." She opened the door, relief flooding her, but it vanished when she saw his expression. His face was pale, his eyes filled with something she couldn't read. "What is it?" she asked. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Then he spoke, his voice low. "Victoria, you need to know the truth about your father. And about me." Her blood ran cold, the world tilting beneath her. She stared at him, every nerve in her body bracing for the revelation. The folder lay open between them, pages fluttering as the wind from the storm seeped through the cracks of the window. Lightning illuminated Noah's face, shadowing him with an intensity that sent chills racing down her spine. And in that moment, she realized the true danger might not be outside, but sitting in the room with her. The storm over New York had not yet broken, but the sky felt heavy, the city restless, as though it sensed the weight of what was about to happen. For Victoria Kane, this night was more than a confrontation. It was the crucible of her entire life. Every betrayal, every scar, every restless night had brought her here. She stood before the shimmering glass tower of Kane Global, her family's empire, the very place that had stolen from her, discarded her, and underestimated her. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass doors, calm, poised, with eyes carrying both grief and fire. Inside her coat pocket was the encrypted drive, the culmination of months of sleepless nights, her brilliance and her pain. It contained evidence of Edward Kane's crimes, money laundering, arms trafficking, corruption. But more than numbers, it contained stories, villages stripped of water by corporate deals, children poisoned by chemical waste, lives ruined by greed. For once, the power was hers. She entered the lobby. Security guards stiffened, their radios buzzing, but Victoria didn't falter. Her heels echoed against the marble floor like war drums. "Tell Edward I'm here," she said, her voice cutting through the air like glass. The guards hesitated, but Edward's orders had always been clear. Victoria was not to be touched. "Family," he had once said with a sneer, "must destroy itself." The elevator ride felt like a countdown. Floor by floor, she replayed everything. The night she was exiled, the lies whispered into boardrooms, the friends who abandoned her, the man she loved who chose power over her. At the top, the doors opened into the boardroom. A cathedral of glass and steel, it overlooked the city. Edward Kane sat at the head of the long obsidian table, flanked by executives, lawyers, and her brother Julian. They looked like a tribunal, a family dressed in wool's clothing. "Victoria," Edward drawled, his smile venomous. "The prodigal daughter returns. What is it this time? Another lecture on morality? She slid the drive across the table. Evidence of every crime you've ever buried. Tonight, the world learns who you really are. Julian smirked. And you think they'll believe you? The disgraced heiress? You've always been reckless, Victoria. This is another tantrum. Her hand trembled, not from fear, but from rage barely caged. This isn't about me. This is about justice. About every person you've destroyed while hiding behind your empire. Edward leaned back, steepling his fingers. Justice is a story, my dear. And stories are written by the powerful. A movement at the far end of the room caught her eye. Adrian Cross stepped forward, the man she once loved, the man who had betrayed her trust for a seat at Edward's table. His expression was unreadable, torn between guilt and resolve. Adrian, she whispered, her chest tightening. Not you too. His voice was low, pained. Victoria, you don't understand. I never wanted this, but you chose them, she cut in, bitterness coating every word. You chose power over love. Silence thickened the room. Her heart ached, but she forced herself to stay steady. She could not falter now, not when everything was at stake. Edward's laughter filled the air, dark and cold. How poetic! My daughter, the idealist. My son, the coward. My empire, untouchable. He tapped the drive with one finger. And this will vanish before the night is over. Victoria straightened, her eyes blazing. Not this time. You see, Edward, you taught me too well. That's not the only copy. Gasps rippled across the room. I've already released it, she continued, her voice ringing like a verdict. By now, federal agents are watching this tower. By dawn, Kane Global falls. Julian shot up, fury twisting his face. You wouldn't. But Edward's smile faltered for the first time. A crack in his armor. The boardroom erupted into chaos, executives whispering, lawyers scrambling, phones buzzing with news alerts already spilling into the world. Victoria turned to leave, but Adrian stepped into her path. His eyes begged her for something. Mercy, forgiveness, or maybe one last chance. Victoria, he said, his voice breaking. I never stopped loving you. I was weak, but I thought I could protect you by being inside his circle. I was wrong. Please, let me make this right. Her chest ached with memories, the nights they dreamed together, the promises whispered in the dark. But the pain cut deeper. Love without loyalty is just betrayal, she said softly, her words like a blade. Tears glimmered in his eyes, but she walked past him. Downstairs, sirens wailed. News crews swarmed. The sky finally broke open, rain pelting against the glass, as if the heavens themselves were cleansing the city. Federal agents flooded the lobby, storming the elevators. Shouts echoed from above as the empire crumbled, floor by floor. Victoria stepped into the storm. The rain soaked her hair, her coat, but she didn't care. For the first time in years, she felt light, free. A single text lit up her phone from an unknown number. You did it. They're finished. The world knows. A friend. She smiled faintly, not knowing who had sent it. An ally in the shadows, or perhaps fate itself. That night, Victoria Kane walked away from the ruins of her family's empire. She had not won riches, nor reclaimed love, but she had seized something far greater. Her own truth, her own power, her own voice. The world would remember Edward Kane as a tyrant. They would remember Julian as complicit, but they would remember her as the woman who stood against them and burned their empire to ash. And though her heart carried scars of betrayal, of lost love, of battles fought alone, it also carried fire. For Victoria Kane had proven that even in a world built on lies and cruelty, a single voice, unbroken, could still shake the foundations of power. And this was only the beginning.